Welcome to the Atheist Experience Live. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, very special guests in from Removing the Fig Leaf. Neil Carter, who's been here before.
Yes.
And Sarah Morehead, who should have been here before,
Right.
but has not. I've known both of them for quite a while. I mentioned this today today was the ACA lecture series, which takes place at the Austin History Center here in Austin. At about 12:30 or so, you can find out more information at the ACA website, www.atheist-community.org. And they showed up, drove down from Dallas specifically to give this talk this morning, a lot about sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about some of that, and we'll get to your calls as well, because this is a live call-in show from Austin, Texas, sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin. Today is Sunday, April 10th, 2016. This is, I think, season 20, episode 14 of the show that will never end. And we're back up to trying to do 90-minute shows as well. For more information about how to contact the show, the phone number, looks like I'm sticking my finger in somebody's coffee cup, but it's actually
lower.
Right down there, directly below, there's the number. And also, if you go to www.atheist-experience.com, in the Contact the Show section, you'll see a little green link that says Call the Show, so you can contact us from your PC or your mobile device. The call screeners will talk to you more about what you need to do, but the big thing is, if you can make a Skype call, Google Hangout call, you can use that link, and you're probably already set up. Please try to make sure you use headphones, and I know that some of you will end up waiting a long time, maybe even the entire show and not get on at all. But there's nothing more frustrating than when we go to somebody and I say, thanks for waiting, you're on the air. What I hear is, thanks for waiting, you're on the air, because you didn't put earbuds in or whatever. So how are you guys?
Great.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Enjoyed giving the talk earlier today. Got a lot of really good questions.
So I've known Sarah for years, and for those of you who are familiar with the debate I did with Cy 10 Bruggencate, Sarah was the one who arranged that. Do not blame her, blame me. Thank her.
It was fabulous.
For doing all the hard work. It was also the first time I met Neil in person, and that was the debate was fun. But my favorite thing about it, the whole reason she had to arrange it was because Cy is an ass.
Yes.
And I had him blocked on Facebook and Twitter and email. And I said, if you want to have a debate, you can talk to my agent, and that's Sarah. And so he treated you like crap multiple times through the debate.
Yes.
Yes.
He did.
And then when it was over, she wanted to get a picture with the two of us. And he refused to take a picture with her. And that is the reason why Cy will never debate me again.
Class act.
Yeah. I don't care if, Hitler and Jerry Falwell got together and gave me a podium to speak to people. If they want a picture afterwards, I'm taking the picture. And for you to be that disrespectful to somebody who gave you a place to talk,
That's that whole
beyond it.
disagree without being disagreeable, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what it comes down to.
Well, but
That's
you
all right.
guys have ventured off into a new project,
Yes, we
a
have.
blog project. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, removing the fig leaf gets its metaphor from the biblical story in which man and woman were created and they were fine and they were happy with who they were physically, but then something made them ashamed of themselves.
Oh, no.
And so as a result, they wove together something to cover their nakedness because of their shame. And it seemed to us that that's a perfect metaphor for religion. It's something that takes who you are naturally and then it tries to cover it because it's something you're supposed to be ashamed of. And so what we're doing at this point as deconverts is we're working on removing the fig leaf by rediscovering what sexuality free of religious shame looks like and feels like.
There's a lot people calling, I don't know, I didn't name the show The Atheist Experience. I've been hosting it for 11 or 12 years or something like that now. And from time to time people say, well, why would you name the show The Atheist Experience? And we get into discussions about what's atheism about, and it's just about disbelief in God. And you're correct. Atheist, the label is, I don't believe a God exists, thank you, we're done. But fortunately, atheists are a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Whether you call yourself an atheist, agnostic, secularist, freethinker.
Humanist.
Humanist.
We have lives and we have things that affect all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And the secular community in general is kind of growing. So we have recovering from religion, dealing with people who are having difficulties coming out of religions. We have Grief Beyond Belief for help with grief counseling stuff. We have Foundation Beyond Belief. There's a clergy project for active information. And now, while this isn't really a network like that, you guys are specifically targeting sex, I guess, and the communications about sex because that's something we kind of all care about.
It is, and it's one of those things that, as people are letting go of religion and leaving all of that, you start asking yourselves, why do we have the expectations and rules in place that we do with relationships, with boundaries, with sexuality? And when you start asking those questions and working your way back, it tends to go back to because religion said so. And so if we don't necessarily want to live our lives under a construct of religious, oversight, what does that look like, and how does that affect sexuality? And that's what we're doing. So we've got a team of writers. We've got about 45 people who are on the roll, and we've had a few dozen articles go out. And we're just letting them kind of talk about their own sexuality and how religion affected it, how leaving religion has transformed their sexuality into a more positive direction, and just what that looks like for everyone.
So I like the fact that part of this is about stories. I am friends with and am a great admirer of Margaret Downey, who has repeatedly pointed out that if the community needs anything, more of anything, it's more people telling their stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because you guys have all dealt with this before. Mm-hmm. I'm the only atheist in my town. Mm-hmm. No, you're not. You're not at all.
Just don't know it.
Nobody's ever gone through what I've gone through.
Not
Wrong.
true.
Everybody, a good chunk of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so building communities like this, I love the fact that the blog is starting to take stories, and you kind of hinted that there might be more to this later.
Well, I could foresee this growing into a larger community of people that are drawn together because they have the same interests and the same concerns. And sexuality is something that's so universally interesting to so many people, and it's so central to people's identity, their understanding of themselves, that I can see a lot of relationships growing out of this, because you read somebody and you say, that's exactly like me, and I've been through that same thing, and they connect with each other. And I could see that the people who have already come in are diverse in what they're good at. So they're not all just writers. Some of them want to host podcasts. Some of them want to do video conferencing to help people work through their issues. There are a lot of different directions it can go, and I could just see it growing into a much larger thing than just a singular blog.
So what kind of content do you have on there now? What kind of things are you looking forward to talking about? Has there been, I don't know, what's the most popular thing that's hit so far?
I think our most popular article so far was there was one that one of our writers put together about their honeymoon night, and they and their wife had spent 8 years practicing abstinence, and were very
I'm assuming
excited.
they got it right.
They apparently took a lot of practice.
Okay.
So they got to their honeymoon night and were both very excited. And he writes about the whole build up to it, and the preparation involved, and the expectations were incredibly high. And what they hadn't gotten was really a comprehensive sex education to understand. I know, don't get ahead of me. Where they would understand the different things that you can use and shouldn't use in certain places. So she had a bachelorette party and been gifted different kinds of lube to facilitate the evening, and one of them was cinnamon. And the entire rest of the article, it's a hysterical retelling, but it's essentially what happens when you use cinnamon lube in the wrong places.
It went south.
It went south, yes. But what was really cool is as it went, this article went pretty wild, and everybody loved it. But what was exciting was we were watching the commentary on it, and so many people were saying, "Oh my gosh, I remember feeling exactly like that. I remember not knowing these things." And it's this idea that when we grow up in this mindset of religious oversight with our sexuality, there are so many things we just don't know that we don't know. And so what we're trying to do is give an opportunity for people to talk about that and explore that. We have an article exploring sex toys and safe ones and all of that. There's all kinds of things. We've got people who identify as transgender writing about their exploration of their own sexuality. The diverse voice is really a big part of what we're trying to provide.
Dan, now to be fair, I'm assuming that because anybody could make the mistake of putting cinnamon lube in places where it might be sensitive.
Do you have a story?
We're not necessarily. I don't have a story on that.
This is a safe place, Matt.
But
We're
I
here
would
for you.
say that I would say that none of us would say religion is to blame for someone putting cinnamon. But the thing is,
It can be.
It's the idea that that there was nothing prior to that really gave either of them a safe place that they could have these conversations with people they loved and trusted, their family members, their friends. It was the entire article. The point is, we basically went into this blind and had no idea what we were doing. And one of the consequences of that was, unfortunately, place cinnamon lube.
Yeah, it's both a failure of opening up the conversation, getting people information, but also many religions are kind of incredibly controlling about the topic, such that even in areas where you probably could have and should have had access to good information, that's not something you go out looking for. It's not something you're likely to get because sex is naughty or sex is reserved for marriage.
Right, and the church, in American history anyway, the church has controlled the narratives about sexuality for so long that they've set the definitions of what is and isn't sexual and what is and isn't right and moral in that area. And it's time for other people to be telling different stories and framing that differently. And when we begin to do that, what we find is there's a great deal of need for that control exerted. You know, there's a freak out moment where they realize we're talking about sex openly, and that in and of itself is offensive. And we can begin by trying to dissect that and say you have a negative view of sexuality, and they push back and they say that's not at all the case. We think sex is a good thing, and yet you see how awkward they are around the subject.
Even what they mean by sex.
They're
only talking about heterosexual sex within the bounds of marriage, and
there's this
sometimes
specific compartment that it's allowed to exist.
Right. Sometimes it's even down to correct positions. So they are controlling the narrative and have been
there's
for
more
so
than
long.
one position?
Yeah, there is. I could draw you a picture. And yeah, see, here's some.
So while Neil's drawing me a new Kama Sutra, so obviously, you've got a lot of different people who are contributing to this. There's a lot of different writers. I was going to ask kind of what the editorial process is like, because I can imagine if I had 40 some odd bloggers, they're not all going to agree on certain things. They're going to be at different levels of understandings about different things. Some of them are going to use the wrong word at the wrong time in the wrong way. And somebody else might be, well, we're writing about sex, so let me get this particularly explicit thing in there. Are you two the overseeing editorial board that says yes and no, final stop?
Well, in a final stop sense, yes. We do have editors that go through the articles first, and then they get passed on to us. And we have a writers group where we talk these things out with each other. It's very important to us to teach our writers and work with them if they need help to do so on nuance and innuendo and those things, as opposed to just being completely graphic. We want this to be something that's digestible for a broad audience, and isn't necessarily, for lack of a better term, a turnoff. So as far as the actual process, they submit their articles, and then the editor, their primary editor, goes through them, and then we'll take a look at them for the final okay before they go forward. As far as people being in different places at different times with their writing, that's part of what's really valuable and what we really like about what we're seeing. We have people who are writing articles, and we'll get feedback that says, hey, this particular article used this phrase of sexuality incorrectly, and it's offensive because of these reasons. And we're able to pass that information on to the writer, and they can incorporate that or use that. But that's where they were at the time, and I think many of us can look back and say, there was a time that some of us were homophobic. There was a time when some of us, were transphobic. There's, all of us have been through those, time periods, well, most of us, when we've come out of that mindset. So part of this is, letting people who are in different places kind of unpack that and work through it. So we try really hard not to micromanage the writers, but really just to support what message they're trying to get out.
So what's probably the biggest thing, the most damaging aspect of religion's intrusions upon sexuality, about who, what we're doing and who?
Personally, my take on that is that in order to pitch people the idea that they need something more than this life has to offer, you have to heighten their sense of dissatisfaction with this life. And you want them to not feel at home in themselves, in their own bodies. So that's where the sex negativity comes from. And so what happens is there's this pervasive, subtle, undermining sense that being physical is somehow bad. And so you feel guilty for the fact that you have a body, and the body has urges and has needs. And instead of enjoying them, instead of just fully inhabiting your physical self, you're made to feel that somehow it's not okay to be who you are, that you need something. You need to be taken out of who you are and rescued from it. When, in a sense, that's the central sales pitch for the Christian faith. You're so bad, you need to be saved from something, and that includes yourself.
And I talked before about the guilt cycle that most of us are familiar with, where you can't possibly live up to the expectations, so that constantly brings you back, and I need to rededicate my life, and I've sinned.
Again.
And in Catholicism, it's what sends you to confession, and in the Southern Baptists and other Protestants, it's the one, the rededications, and it's time for me to get my walk with the Lord right, and all these other things. And quite often, they're only talking about things that are who we are. The fact that you looked at someone with lust, by the way, is the reason we're all here.
Interesting. Yeah.
And yet, it's that very thing that you can't avoid that they need to make you feel guilty about so that they can go back to here. Now, I grew up primarily Southern Baptist. Sex was a good thing within the bounds of marriage, and even my parents would, say that, oh yeah, sex is a wonderful thing, it's a gift from God and all this other stuff. And they would view this as being very pro-sex. But of course, they are only pro-sex in the sense of in the bounds of marriage as a heterosexual,
They're
couple.
completely okay with it in this bubble.
Yeah.
And they were okay talking in detail with you about it?
Not until I got married.
Okay.
And then I got way more information than I ever really wanted.
Stop.
Yeah. But I also remember, because a lot of people, masturbation is a terrible sin. And I know some of my Catholic friends would kind of get that. I did not. I actually got busted masturbating once. I don't remember how old I was, but I was pretty young. And I remember exactly what happened. I was watching, of all things, Saturday Night Live.
Wow.
And there was a lingerie sketch in this episode of Saturday Night Live. And my mom walked out because everybody else was asleep. And I was in the living room. And I remember that the conversation was very short, and it was very, that needs to take place in the bathroom or in someplace private. And that was the end
Which
of
is
it.
a perfectly healthy way to approach that.
Sure.
And that it surprised me because I remember conversations where we went to someone's house and they would, around the dinner table, like casually talk about masturbation, and it, like, my folks were not okay with that conversation.
Yeah, no.
Right.
And so I was expecting to get in just tons of trouble and did not. And that was pretty much the end of it for that. So even within a particular denomination or within a specific church, we're getting baggage from what our parents have taught us, from, which churches we went to before and what their version was.
Right.
And so much of that is that nonverbal too, because like you're saying, they didn't overtly say this is a problem, but when it comes up in other contexts outside of that particular bubble, then they're uncomfortable. Somehow you picked up on that was not okay and that was inappropriate, but then you can internalize that and it becomes a problem. And
Well, it's also about lust. Lust is a problem. But
Right.
the thing is,
It's a carnal
I don't
sin.
know. Now, maybe somebody out there has a different way of doing it. I don't know how to masturbate without lust. I don't know what drives that other than that. I don't.
Right.
It can be done.
Well, you're the expert. I'm here to listen to you.
I've heard from friends that it can be done.
But so we end up with a lot of baggage. Now, I'm not going to air all of my baggage on this episode of the show.
This is fascinating. Please, we're...
But I had quite a bit of baggage, even though while I was still a believer, I didn't wait till I was married to have sex. Didn't even wait till I was out of high school to have sex, despite being in a Southern Baptist. But it was more about disappointment.
Right.
It was more about you've done something, but it's not jeopardizing your eternity in heaven. It's just something that you need to make amends for. So it was more of that guilt cycle tool than it was, a cardinal sin.
Right, right.
Well, the point is, it still gives a drive to that sense that you need something, you need to be saved from something. Even if it's a minor thing, it just kind of contributes to the feeling of inadequacy as a human being, that you're not able to control yourself because you're having thought crimes.
Well, and it also implies that anyone else has the right to delegate your own sexuality on any level. Like,
There's a control issue there.
It's a control issue. It's the idea that you're controlling your own sexuality in a way to gain approval from your, church group. Like, that's in and of itself a problem. It's provided it's under the banner of safe, sane, and consensual, it's appropriate. So that's the end of it.
So let's kind of kill off one thing that comes up, which I'm sure you guys are going to deal with many, many more times as Removing the Fig Leaf continues, and that's the naturalistic fallacy. Religions make use of this. The naturalistic fallacy is essentially saying because something is natural, it is therefore good, or because something occurs in nature, this is the way it ought to be. And religions exploit that by talking about the natural world and God. They use a God as an anchor for the naturalistic fallacy. And I can remember when I was a teenager, if I saw two guys kissing, it was kind of a visceral, like that kind of reaction.
Right.
My assumption at the time was that this was God working through the natural world to dictate to me, to train my conscience about what was right and what was wrong. And
What about the other guys' consciences?
well, they had been given over to reprobate minds.
Oh, not alternative consciences?
This was Satan had taken over their lives.
Right.
Gotcha.
So
Clearly.
Not yours, though.
As I got older, though, and had more interactions with people, all of a sudden my views about homosexuality changed. But it was a gradual thing. And, eventually I'm working on behalf of LGBTQ rights and other things, and I've got no issue with it. But it never occurred to me that my response to this had changed until Dawn, who co-hosts the show and was supposed to be here today. My apologies to the people who were waiting to see Dawn, but we had special guests. At Dawn's wedding, when it was all over and they kissed, I was just like, oh.
Right.
And I thought, I would have never reacted like that 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly, even if that was the natural reaction, that doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
But I think we have clear evidence that the reactions that we think sometimes are the natural reactions are learned.
Right, they're very, very learned.
Well, even the, there's been a lot said about how the standards of beauty change from culture to culture, and they even change within a culture over time. Mm-hmm. So these are things that we think are natural, and we think that they're automatic, but they're not once you compare other cultures. Just like any other thing, the moment you get exposed to cultures other than your own, it bursts your bubble, and you realize that you didn't have the corner on truth.
And that's one of the reasons I was happy I was in the Navy for 8 years. Not only did I have to work side by side with people whose beliefs were different from mine, but we went around to other countries and you saw things. And the initial response to any of it is this seemingly natural xenophobic, oh, that's weird. Mm-hmm. There's something mm-hmm. about this culture that's weird. Right. And as you... there are religionists who would argue that what's actually happened is that we've become systematically desensitized, mm-hmm. which is probably correct. But we were conditioned to be
you were sensitized in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it cuts both ways.
So, it's a live call-in show. We've got a number of people on the phone. I don't know how many of them actually want to talk about sex. But
so maybe we could get them into talking about it if we just start out.
We can start with Brian in Omaha, who's been waiting and has a question for us. You there, Brian?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. So my question is not about sex. Laugh out loud.
I bet it is about sex, and you just don't realize it yet.
Wait till we're done.
Is your question about evolution?
Yes, sir.
Then it's about sex.
There we go.
Okay. Well, my question is basically, cut to the short. Why is it true?
I don't know why it's true, but it is.
Okay, well, I mean, is it because of similarities or what?
I don't know what you mean.
I mean, what makes evolution a fact according to science?
It's an observed fact. The fact that things change over time.
So you assume that they change feature, like total body feature, over time?
Yes, because that's what DNA and the fossil record tell us.
Well, I mean, why do you mention DNA? We're 92% similar to that of a mouse, and yet we look nothing like we look nothing like a mouse.
Yeah, but the differences exist, right? So we're not identical in DNA to the mouse, right?
Yeah.
So we take a look at, here's where we share DNA, because we're living creatures who are mammals who reproduce. There's the sex.
There you go.
There are differences, though. And then we can take a look at the DNA, the genetic code for a lot of different animals and start to see where they overlap and where they're different. And that's how we identify which genes are responsible for which aspects. You do know that, for example, with mice, I mean, they've grown like a human ear on the back of a mouse because we're so similar. Nobody's saying we're identical. As a matter of fact, it is the non-evolution model, the theistic model, is the one under which you would not have any reason to think that those genetic similarities would necessarily exist. But the question, I have a question for you, Brian.
Yes, sir.
Let's assume that we're completely wrong about evolution. Okay?
Uh-huh.
What reason do we have to think that there's a God?
So, I mean, I have no problem saying that, I can't prove God. Like, I mean,
Okay, then we're done, aren't we?
No, actually we're not, because there's another alternative that I don't think people really care to take into consideration.
Okay, what's another alternative that we're ignoring?
So like I always think about how can science prove that a God can exist without it being observed? Like that's
I
what
don't.
always
I'm not
wonder.
saying that science can. As a matter of fact, I don't think that the question
Which one?
can be which God first of all. But I don't think that the question. Science, by the way, recognizes that it cannot confirm supernatural causation. So there's no way to confirm this.
Yeah, and that's why.
So
supernatural.
Given that that's the case, so do you believe that there's something supernatural?
Yeah, I mean, just
Okay.
looking at.
So why would you believe that there's something supernatural if you don't have any way to confirm it?
No, I was about to say, just looking. I mean, this is where the disconnection comes with an atheist when they're talking to a Christian. Like when I look at creation, I mean, when I look at when I look outside and I see, concise and I can't look outside and just go, oh, that just came by chance. Like,
okay, but nobody's asking you to do that. What's happening is you're looking outside and you're saying the best explanation for that is something supernatural that we can't investigate and can't confirm. How do you reach that conclusion that something that you can't investigate and you can't have evidence for is in fact the best explanation? How is it an explanation at all?
Well, I mean, so you're making, are you making the argument that science can explain everything?
I'm making so no, I'm not saying that science can explain everything. I'm saying that science is the only way that we have that provides consistent, reliable, testable, confirmable results that give us information about things. I would never claim that science has explained everything, clearly, otherwise we'd be done doing science. But there may also be things that are also permanently outside the realms of our ability to investigate. The question is, if that's the case, what justification can you have for believing that they are in fact real?
That the supernatural is actually real?
That anything that we haven't confirmed, anything that isn't currently testable. Because tomorrow we might find a way to test for the supernatural, but so far we haven't. So until we find a way to test for something, the one and only correct response is we don't know whether or not this thing is real.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, I mean, okay.
You're the one that's bucking that, not me. I'm saying I don't know, and you're claiming that you do. Or that you at least believe, and I want to know why. But Neil might have more.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it's okay. Well, as far as like believing in some sort of God, like I literally could care less. Like when someone says which one, because to me,
okay, stop.
I can't,
Brian.
Really.
Seriously. So this is the atheist experience, and you called in to basically explore your doubts about evolution. And now you don't care whether or not a God exists or which one.
No, I do, actually.
You do?
I mean, no. You're just really okay, I just want to...
Am I being extra confusing?
Brian,
No,
let me interject.
By all
Okay,
means.
so when we say which one, the point, I think what we're saying is it's not important to you which one it is we're proving, but what we're saying is that is important. When you ask whether or not a God can be disproved by science, it depends on which one. It depends on what sorts of claims are being made about the God. So what he said is right. There isn't anything generic about science that you can say disproves all gods, because it depends on what you're even saying. The God of deism is almost impossible to disprove because there's no claims made about it that are testable in any way. What would be testable is if you begin making claims that say, well, I have a God that speaks and can reliably speak in ways that we understand, and when he speaks, and it's a him for some reason, it says that you can pray for things and they will happen. That's now suddenly testable. Now all of a sudden we've entered the realm of empiricism, and we can see whether or not what your religion claims is true, because it's no longer in that ethereal, generic sense. Now it's something specific and testable, and that's why we asked which God it is that we're talking about. And just to piggyback on the problem with the evolution question, the fact that you look out and see a world you can't explain is not actually a good argument for the existence of invisible beings. I can't explain X, Therefore, an invisible person must have made it. That's not a very good argument.
No.
That's a leap.
I've heard that argument countless of times, and
So do you have a better
the
one?
only thing is the only thing is like morality. Like science claims. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. But
You're
like,
wrong.
What I get from science is that life started with a molecule, and yet they think morality came from a molecule.
Okay, so I don't know how we got to morality because that's completely
Separate
independent of the study.
No. Actually, sir, it is very. You can easily correlate this with evolution because
Really? Okay, you've got a minute. Please demonstrate that morality and evolution are somehow intertwined.
All right. Well, if evolution is true, that makes morality nothing but an opinion. So
No, it doesn't.
If someone comes, yes, it does.
Okay, prove that.
Proof. I mean, okay, then it really means that all morals are just an opinion of how they want to live life. So what Stalin actually did and what Hitler actually did
No.
was
No.
That escalated
So
quickly.
let's say that I was willing to go ahead and concede that everybody has opinions about morality. Okay?
yeah.
How does a God fix that?
How does it God? It basically like lays the fine foundation of what why
I
we
still
morality
I
and-
still have my opinions about morality, whether God exists or not, right?
Yes.
Okay? So how does a God fix this problem?
You basically can't justify your morals because all you have is.
How do you justify it with a God?
Because it's like that's why like there's religions out there like.
That's your
there's
opinion.
a reason, huh?
That's just your opinion, dude.
No, I mean it's.
And even if there's a God and he has thoughts about morality, that's just his opinion. That doesn't mean he's right.
Well, let me ask you this: like, where do you think morals came from then?
I don't think. What do you mean morals came from? So
Where did morality first
moral
came from?
assessments, moral values came from our interactions. I'd rather not die. I'd rather not have people kill me, and therefore it's in my best interest to gather around with other people who would rather not die, and together we will say, you know what, killing people is wrong, and the people who don't necessarily agree with that aren't part of this in-group. The people who don't prefer life over death tend to kill themselves off, etc. You act like as if there's something intrinsic and about morality. So my view of morality, and I've talked about this a lot, and you can go Google the superiority of secular morality, is that we begin with very simple beginnings. Life is generally preferable to death, health is generally preferable to sickness, pleasure is generally preferable to pain, and these aren't absolutes, these are general guidelines because they're going to come in conflict. And so we have to do the hard work about thinking about how our actions have consequences, and that what I do is going to impact everybody else, and what everybody else does is going to impact me, and then we come up with the best solutions that lead to a better world for all of us, hopefully. Now, when you inject a God in there, you haven't fixed a thing. All you've done is claim that you have somebody else that you can point to who's more powerful, who agrees with you, or who you're agreeing with.
Okay, well, so you don't go think about the fact that you have a moral standard, like knowing that there is a certain way to live.
Why is it wrong to kill somebody?
Why is it wrong to kill someone?
Yeah.
Because that's killing life. Like why
Okay.
why would you ask me that?
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I mean, it's a very kind of loose answer. This comes up a lot when you haven't think about it. You'll notice that you didn't answer because God said so. That wasn't your answer. So you and I are in agreement.
Why?
You and I are in agreement that it's wrong to kill people indiscriminately. I mean, maybe self-defense and whatever. If I just, for no good reason, lop off Neil's head, we would agree that that's wrong, right? And your explanation when I asked why, you didn't say because God said so, and you didn't say because God doesn't want me to lop off Neil's head. You made an appeal to the consequences of the action. Sorry, I'm so violent today.
Wow.
Sir,
I'm so glad I came.
Wait, sir, hold on a second. Because, I mean, morality, though, it proves that life was made with an intent to live.
No, it doesn't.
How can? Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't. You want to keep going back and forth, or do you want to actually offer an actual argument for this? Because if you're just going to keep making assertions, I have guests and other callers. So if you're going to say that something is the case, you need to make some, even if it's a shitty argument, that goes beyond just stating it. Because we can do yes, it does, no, it doesn't, until I decide to hang up.
So, okay, well, I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I take this with a lot of passion, and I'm sorry that it came across in some disrespectful manner. That is not.
I'm not worried about I don't feel disrespected. I want arguments and evidence to back up positions, and you can present them with as much disrespect to me as you want, and I will love the crap out of an actual argument with evidence more than a respectful, peaceful, polite, bald-ass, unsupported assertion.
Dude, are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious. I actually care about what's true far more than I care about whether or not you're respectful.
See, okay, so that's the issue with atheists that I personally like.
No,
really,
Brian.
Yeah,
Brian, because not all atheists are going to agree with me on that. So it can't be the problem with atheists.
I'm actually quite nice. I'm not like him.
Sir, the only thing is that, I mean, if you really didn't think that this universe was created with an intent,
I really don't.
Then why do we have an intent to live? Can you explain that?
Why do we have an intent to live?
Why like did it just so happen that all of a sudden the universe went from an unintentional piece of crap bullshit that just somehow came together, and then all of a sudden it created morality and knowing what's right from wrong?
Yeah, so here's the thing. Your argument is, if I don't accept that the universe was created with an intent, how do I explain our desire to continue living?
No, why? That's you're just explaining how. Can you explain why? Like why do I have the innate feeling of knowing what is right from wrong?
We don't agree. Even the three of us probably don't have the same innate opinions about what's right and wrong. You and I definitely don't agree.
Okay, well,
different cultures in different parts of the world disagree.
But your argument a minute ago was, if I don't believe that the universe was created with intent, then how do we get to an intent to live? And that question, as weirdly phrased as it is essentially saying, why is it that we care about living and want to continue living if we weren't created with an intent to keep living?
All I'm saying is accidents don't create intent, so it is really...
You haven't demonstrated any intent.
How is this not common logic? Like, I mean, I'm
okay,
I'm
so
really
first of
curious.
all, the phrase common logic is going to disqualify you from any reasoned discussion, because logic is
That's a fallacy.
No, actually, it's not a fallacy. Which fallacy is it, smartass?
Smartass?
If you're going to tell me that I committed a fallacy while I'm demonstrating what's wrong with your argument, you better be able to identify it. What's the fallacy?
Well, you're just trying to hit me personally, like that
Subject
gets you
change.
nowhere. Like, it just gets you nowhere, sir.
Okay, it's the get you nowhere fallacy. Goodbye, Brian. Thanks for calling.
Next.
So, it's the get you nowhere fallacy.
Yep.
Well, and also, you're rude, therefore I don't have to answer your questions.
And the thing is, I'm not necessarily sure that I was rude.
I don't think so.
But
Not really.
for the people who think I am, that's fine.
Because you said smartass,
It is.
and that's a dirty word.
If you had said smart aleck,
Yes.
then okay.
Well, he said bullshit, so I
Right,
thought it was
so
okay.
it was
well,
right.
you started it.
Yeah.
Well, next I'm dropping an F-bomb. So
Okay.
get ready.
That's just going to escalate. The next guy is going to come out swinging.
I know.
Yeah.
So for the people who aren't quite getting this, what's that?
I'm just looking at the names.
For the people who kind of phased out through that muddled, meandering conversation, let's kind of hit this. Sarah, why do you care about continuing to live?
Because I don't want to die.
Is it? I mean, do you think that there's some innate principle in the universe that makes you not want to die?
Well, I think biologically we have a drive for survival as a species that is, I'm fairly certain, has some evidence behind it. I mean, like every single animal species and plants even.
But there are
trying
people
to survive. But that doesn't necessarily equate to, that there's some cosmic survival plan or reason. That's just biology. Every single species wants to continue its species. See, there we go.
But there are people who don't want to continue living.
Sure.
Why would they not want to continue living?
Because they don't want to.
Well,
I'm sorry to be so simplistic
are you saying
about it,
that?
but it's like-
Are you saying that the desires of the individual, with regard to what they want to do, should be self-sufficient and shouldn't need justification externally?
Yeah, basically. I mean, as an informed, consenting adult, yes.
It seems to me that if you have a mass of living things and half of them don't have a desire to survive and the other half do, the ones that have the desire to survive are the ones that are going to survive to the next generation to reproduce more just like them who also want to survive.
So wait a minute,
vast
the people who
majority-
wanted to continue living
Don't.
procreated by having sex
Oh, see, there he brings it all back around again.
Segway. Brilliant.
and
Very
produced
good.
more offspring. So we are the descendants of people who wanted to continue living.
Yeah,
Correct.
and probably worked very hard at that.
Natural selection.
Man, there's that sex thing again.
There you are.
Back to evolution, everything, we're all right there.
We'll try another caller here. Ajith, is that right? Ajith in the UK?
Yeah, that's Ajith from UK, yes.
How are
Hello,
you?
Matt. I am good. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing well. Please say hello to Neil Carter and Sarah Morehead.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Neil.
Hi, Ajith.
What would you
Hi.
like to talk about today?
Well, I just wanted to know your opinion on my view of theism. And then I heard the previous caller talking about evolution and your talk about sex. And
Yes.
first of all, I would like to tell you I'm really a good fan of you. The way you present your arguments are really wonderful. So I would like to say that please keep up your work, and then I do love all your work, and I've watched few of your videos, and your answers are really mind-blowing.
Well, thank you.
That's okay. But before I go up to my actual question, I just wanted to tell one thing about one small comment about morality and other things what he was discussing.
Okay.
That's just my view, and I might be wrong. So I just
I might
wanna
be wrong
mention
too.
that.
We're like best friends
Yeah,
already.
we're
This is
like
going
in
well.
agreement.
Yes. My view of morality is like why morality would come into human beings is like in a linear phase we have the highest thing is the world peace, where it's a win-win situation where we have to survive and make sure even our surrounding things also survive. And before that comes an empathy. I feel empathy about some other person standing on standing on his ground. Okay, if I feel the same as a pain, then even that person feels the pain, so I feel empathy, and then hence I would make sure that I and him survive. The just previous thing to that is animal instinct. I have to survive, but I don't worry so much about what's happening in my surroundings, and I just use up the surrounding resource for my survival.
Well, it's not just
And-
about you. I mean,
I'm just telling about the major phases, and then the last one could be like an exploitation phase, where I don't care whether what's happening around in me about whatever that is, but I want to survive, so I would do anything and everything, and I don't care, and then I just try to exploit. So whenever you're talking about morality, or whether that could be morality in terms of sex, in terms of education, in terms of any other manner, we just have to, I think, question ourselves, are we doing it as an animal instinct, or are we exploiting it, or are we doing it for the world peace, or for the betterment or upbringing of everybody, not just ourselves?
Yeah. So,
So when we
motivations count. But
Exactly.
and I've used in the past. I've used an example of kids out to eat with their parents. They're being disruptive, and you take them home, and you've got two kids, and one of them you say the next time we go out to dinner, you're going to behave, and if you do, you'll get dessert, and if not, then you'll get some form of punishment. And the other one, you sit down and you explain about how their actions affect other people, and get them to consider how they would feel if they were those other people, and you build up an understanding of empathy, and you take them back to the restaurant, and the next week they both behave. From the perspective of everybody else, those are well-behaved kids. But we have to ask the question of which one is actually understanding and applying principles of morals and ethics correctly.
It's a good illustration.
Because what happens when the parents and the reward and punishment are removed? One of them has a continual reason, a motivation to behave correctly.
Internalized.
And the other one has had their external motivation removed. So yeah, well, I want to get to, you're a theist of some stripe?
Yes, I am a theist, and I just want to know your opinion about my view of theism.
Okay. Tell us what you believe and why, and I will get opinions from all of us.
Yes, sure, that would be really great. Okay, my view of theism is that I believe my parents are my God, and gaining proper scientific knowledge is my ritual, and my work is worship, and upliftment of my all fellow being is my religion.
Hang on, can you say all that again just a little slower? Maybe because of the distance, I'm having difficulty understanding.
Okay.
So your parents are your God.
I consider my parents as my God.
Okay.
Interesting
And
word choice.
Gaining my proper scientific knowledge is my ritual.
Okay.
My work is worship.
Your work is worship?
Yep.
Okay.
Upliftment and upbringing of myself and my fellow people with me is my religion.
Okay.
Well, minus the God part, you just described humanism.
Right,
Yeah.
I was going to say that's humanism.
So apart from this idea that your parents are your God, that's humanism. So please, I think the only contention you'll get from the three of us is, why in the world would you consider your parents your God? Do they fit any of the definitions? Do they have any of the characteristics that we would normally associate with a God? Do they expect reverence or worship? Are they deserving of such things? Are they, do they exist outside of space and time? Because to me, if your parents are anything at all like my parents, then saying my parents are my God, you're probably being more metaphoric than literal. And I would still completely disagree with that, because when we identify something as our God, we tend to be talking about something that we revere and worship or put ahead of ourselves, or think.
And has some level of omnipotence or.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I could say, for example,
I mean, mothers can be imposing, but that's a bit far.
Here's this bottle of water.
I gotta meet his parents.
It is my God. Now,
Yeah.
when I say that, what the hell am I actually saying, and what good is it? So, I mean, if I say this bottle of water is my God, and I don't think it has any characteristics that you don't think it has, and I already have a perfectly good label for it as a bottle of water, what is putting the God label onto it add? So, well, I guess we'll let you answer, since there's a lot of questions there.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I consider my parents as God. I'll come back to your water as well. The next statement would be that.
Okay.
That is the highest status that I'm giving them in my life. And the same thing can be applied for the bottle of water which you're showing. When you're really damn thirsty, even a small drop of water will be your God at that time. That is what I would say.
Okay, what does God mean to you?
Something very
Anything
elastic.
that comes to you when you're really in great need and you do need it, then that becomes your God.
So
That is it.
Under that definition, your parents wouldn't be your God. Your God would be whatever you happen to need at the moment. So right now,
Exactly. They taught me how to use whatever things I need.
So right now
And
the
to
internet
gain
is your
them at
God
that
because you
moment.
need it for this phone call. Like, I mean, that doesn't.
Exactly, you're right. Now,
Well, it's a
for the
form of
time being,
Hinduism, right?
phone is my
Right.
God.
I think that's, yeah.
I
Phone
mean-
is also my God. Yes.
So isn't this a
Because
form
that
of
comes
like,
in my use. That also comes in my use.
Ajith, is this distinguishable somehow from Hinduism?
Huh?
You familiar with Hinduism?
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Well,
Yes.
it's almost a pantheism or a panentheism or something that you're describing. I'm not sure how we would go about defending or disproving that.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically saying God is whatever I happen to need at the moment.
It's a pretty elastic definition.
So really, you've defined God as that which I need at any given moment.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just
That's right.
Why wouldn't you just call that what you need at that moment? Because
I mean,
you
can call
realize...
you can call it anything. You can call it anything. That's correct.
Okay,
So if you can call it
anything,
anything, what difference does it make?
Yeah.
why would you call it God when the overwhelming majority of people on the planet, when you use the
Correct.
word God, have some idea of what you're talking about? I bet if you stood out on the corner and asked people, hey, define God, tell me what you think God is, none of them, a vanishingly small percentage of them, would have this nuanced, elastic version of God that you have. And so if that's the case, if you're taking a word that has baggage and using it in a new way that almost nobody else understands, that ignores all the baggage that's with it,
bad
I mean,
communication.
that's like me saying, this bottle of water is my ham sandwich.
Don't start.
I haven't communicated, I haven't added anything to this, I haven't communicated any good information to anybody, and instead I've confused everybody who thinks they know what a ham sandwich is. So why not just say, why not just talk about what you need and talk about the fact that you love your parents and they've done good things for you and that you need your parents as well. I just don't get the God label. And by the way, I don't think that would qualify as theism. It definitely doesn't qualify as theism under classical theism, where classical theism requires a God that is omnipotent, omniscient, etc., to some extent.
He did say it's his
Supernatural.
version of theism,
Yeah.
so.
I mean,
Okay.
I can have my version. So this is the problem with this, illustrated in another way, is there are people who think they have their version of medicine, and they'll call it alternative medicine, and it's garbage without the air. I don't know why I put quotes on that, because it's garbage.
Garbage.
So when you say, this is medicine, and it reminds me of the people who say, oh, well, it's true for me. Something's true or it's not true. It's not true for you. When something's true for you, we're pretty sure it's not actually true. That's my invisible friend is true for me. So I don't think I would call this theism at all.
Okay.
You are free to, provided you don't care whether you're confusing people.
Okay. I get your point. Okay.
Cool. Thanks for calling, though. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to hear your views, and thank you for giving your views. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
That's it. Hey, this one should be easy. We've got Jack in Slovenia. Well, thanks for waiting.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine.
Did you have a question?
Yes, there's all these arguments, right? I mean, you've been hosting the show for 12 years, I'm sure you've heard them all. But I think the strongest one I've heard so far is the fine-tuning argument.
Okay.
So I have my own thoughts on it, and I thought maybe I'd get your opinion about it.
So the universe is not fine-tuned.
I think that sums
Well,
that up pretty nicely.
Yeah, I have seen no good reason to presume that the universe is fine-tuned. Instead, I see lots of good evidence that the things within the universe are the types of things that this particular universe could produce. So it's not the universe being tuned for us; it's we were tuned to the universe by the process of evolution.
Well, I don't. It seems like, let's take the gravitational constant, right?
Okay.
If it were different by a very,
it's not.
very small amount.
But it's not different. So, I mean, now you're talking about some other universe, and we can acknowledge that if any of these changed, we would not have the universe that we currently have. We would either have no universe, or we would have some other universe. But is it impossible that if things had worked out differently, there would be a different sort of intelligent life sitting around going, wow, this universe looks really fine-tuned for me?
Right.
Well, I mean, this is kind of the problem that I have, where you would have to investigate an infinite number of combinations to determine whether life is possible in...
You would have to have alternate universes to experiment with in order to confirm and find out what would actually happen in most cases.
Yeah, or at least model them, which is obviously
So since we
impossible.
can't do that, what conclusion can we reach?
That the argument is based on an assumption that's not really well founded.
Works for
I
me.
agree with
I
that.
think we're all on the same page here.
in order for the fine-tuning argument to make sense, if I understand correctly, there have to be numbers thrown out, statistical numbers. But for any statistical model, there has to be a control. There has to be something by which you check the number of probabilities. That's the number that goes on the bottom, the total number of probabilities. We don't even know what those would be. So it essentially boils down to an argument from ignorance, because we don't have alternative universes at our disposal to compare them to in order to say how probable it was that it turned out the way it did.
And I think, and this just kind of occurred to me, so it's probably a flawed, horrible analogy, but I'll think on it some more later on. There is some sequence of events that had to occur in order for the three of us to be sitting here at this table today. And it stretches back 13.7 billion years, perhaps farther, but an explicit sequence of events, a causal chain. Talking about fine-tuning, the universe was fine-tuned in that causal chain to have the three of us sitting here right now, saying exactly what we're doing, using our hands in the exact way, scratching our nose at exactly the right time, breathing in this way. If any subtle little thing had changed, like if something had happened 20 minutes ago, that might have changed who was up here and what was going on. But what about 50 years ago? What about 100 years ago? What about 1,000 years ago? 1,000,000 years ago? The further you get from something, the more this one little change potentially affects everything else. If you want to talk about what's unlikely, I would think that causal chain that led to us being here is at least as unlikely as anything else we could possibly think of or investigate. And so why don't we hear this fine-tuning argument used in this way? That, well, we, in some cases I suppose we do, where God had a plan for the universe and everything happens according to God's plan. So if that's the case, then it was God's plan that the three of us as godless heathens would be sitting up here debunking all of the arguments and pointing out how he has failed to offer any evidence for his existence. What a dumbass. To construct a universe where
Just for
eventually
us.
there's like a method for three of us to sit around pointing out, yeah, that guy didn't offer any evidence for his existence. And his response to this is to sit silent
To send us callers.
and let me do a show for 11 years. Sorry, go ahead.
Matt, whenever you try.
You're on. Sorry, there's just a delay.
Whenever you try to invoke why would God do X, then God is omnipotent and omniscient and moral, and he knows best. Therefore, he did it for a reason morally sufficient for God. That's like the exact line that you can.
That's the exact line that Cy Ten Bergencake gave during our debate. Fortunately, I'm writing a book called If I Were God that is going to debunk that horrible piece of crap argument and how it's absolutely useless. It doesn't tell you anything. When you say God does it for reasons which God understands that we don't, then you get to ask the question, why didn't God make us capable of understanding his motivations? We don't have to know everything or understand everything, but we could at least understand the motivations. And instead, what you've got is a post hoc rationalization. But
when you go all the way back to creation, where we actually got punished as a species for learning anything at all.
Yeah.
So,
Wait, just a moment. Well, let's go back to the fine-tuning.
okay.
Actually.
And here I thought we were done with it.
Yeah.
No, I'm just trying to get a more with all the premises and all that stuff. So basically, if the universe is just if it is random, then the chance of us being here is exceedingly small.
How do you know that?
Okay.
So first of all, I asked that specifically because number one, I don't see the universe as random. I don't see that as a good description of the universe. There are natural laws that dictate how things are going to work. It's not like I'm just going to randomly float up through the ceiling. So that would be a properly random universe if stuff like that happened. But generally what we find is order, and we find things happening according to this. But even if we were even living in a random universe, how did we determine that it is not the case that this is what had to be? That whether the universe is structured with an order that directly leads to us Or if it was random and this was the only possible outcome. You can't really say that it's improbable that we're here. You need, as Neil was talking about.
There has to be a number on the bottom to make a probability. We have to know how many possible universes there are. And do we have any way, I'm sorry, let me finish.
Oh.
Do we have any way of knowing that there haven't been alternate universes, and this is the one that just happened to have you in it, so it's the one you're aware of?
We're going into the multiverse objection, basically, right?
No, okay.
Not exactly.
So we're pointing out that the argument is based on claiming to know and understand things that don't appear knowable or understandable.
That's my point.
So
Therefore, God.
back to the like gravitational constant or whatever.
Okay.
If it's varied by 1 part in, let's say, 1 million,
Okay.
okay, then stars can't form.
Okay.
This can be calculated with our present knowledge of physics.
We dealt with this.
And if you deal with the
And
weak
yeah,
nuclear force, I fly apart.
I hear the question, haven't we dealt with this? It seems like the interval for the possibility is very small. If it varies by a little amount, it's immediately...
How do you know that it could possibly vary at all? How do you know that it's not the case that it had to be this?
Right.
This is what I'm talking about. So right now, I dropped my pen on the table. Maybe that absolutely had to happen. And spending a lot of time talking about, well, if we had, if this constant of the universe had changed, things would be different. Yes, we agree things would be different, but that's not that's not the universe we live in, and we have no idea that universe is even possible. So why are we wasting time talking about things that we can't investigate? Because all of this is smoke and mirrors to make it seem like, as I spit, to make it seem like, oh, this is so improbable, when actually it may have been unavoidable and inevitable. How did they rule out that it's unavoidable?
Well, first of all, I want to apologize to the chat for irritating them.
Ignore them, I do.
And
I by the way, I don't give a rat's ass if somebody in the chat is irritated. When I'm in the driver's seat for the show, we tend to go by what I happen to like, and we last on a call just as long as I think I want to. If I see something potentially beneficial coming out of it, we'll keep talking. Matter of fact, you get an extra minute beyond my normal frustration just because chat is annoyed.
So basically what I get from this is we only observe our particular set of constants, okay?
Okay.
Therefore, there is actually no evidence to show that any other... We don't know how the universe got there beyond the Big Bang.
Yep, I'm with you.
Right.
Even if God is the explanation, that's still a mechanism.
Yep.
So if there is some mechanism, we know that it is able to produce our particular set of constants, not any other.
We don't know.
We don't know that part.
We don't know if the mechanism could do that. Correct.
Yes. So we would actually have to investigate something that happened before the Big Bang, quote unquote, and
or if we found a way to, for example, create universes.
Yes,
or if we found a way to investigate other universes that may have been created or may have occurred. But we don't have any of that.
And none of that defaults to, so therefore God.
Therefore.
Yeah. So we can't reach any conclusions about it, including, by the way, that a God exists. Because here's the thing. Let's say we found out that this... You want to know what a fine-tuned universe... If I was God and I was going to create... I wouldn't create, billions of stars and millions of galaxies. I don't even know why I'd create a planet. I'm still working on that for the book. But I would at least, if I created this one planet, I wouldn't create a bunch of superfluous planets that have no impact on it at all. So, okay.
Yeah. There's just one, something to think about. I spent a good deal of time on this. Let's say God does exist, okay? This is an assumption.
Okay.
We make it.
Sure.
Therefore, God had the property of wanting to create our universe.
Not necessarily, but...
I mean,
So-
if God's omnipotent, he would have created our universe.
No,
This is just the
that doesn't
assumption.
follow either. Just because something is all powerful doesn't mean it actually exercises that power to do things. It doesn't mean it wants to do things.
Matt. This is-
And there could be a God that we assume that exists that did not, in fact, create our universe.
Yeah, Matt. I am granting the conclusion of the theist's argument and showing that actually it doesn't resolve what they are purporting it would.
And that's exactly what I just said.
Right.
Claiming
I mean, if God did have this attribute, okay, then
If God had what attribute?
if God wanted to, there is this God that supposedly created our universe.
Okay, so we're going
Now-
to accept for the sake of argument that there
Yes,
is a God who wanted to create our universe.
Yes.
Okay?
Okay.
We can't reach any conclusion from that either.
Basically, if God, it is conceivable that God would create any other universe. How come we were so lucky to hit the jackpot with a God that would create us exactly, and not some other universe? So basically, the fine-tuning is just regressed one level and not been resolved.
Sure.
Okay, that sounds.
That's perfectly
That
acceptable.
makes sense.
Even the appearance of fine-tuning that leads to us is not in any way resolved by a God other than you're just claiming, oh, there's a God who wanted to create the universe that leads to us.
Yeah, but that God would have still had to be fine-tuned, but it's not caused, so it would have to have been tuned by itself, and it can just get crazy and silly.
No, you can't say that the God necessarily had to be fine-tuned for that. You don't get to extend that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Jack.
Well, thanks for the conversation. Well, goodbye.
Bye. So we got like 20 minutes left and a couple callers, although one of them has a way of proving or disproving God. So.
Oh, interesting. I'm fascinated to see that.
But I want to make sure, as a reminder, after the show's over, we get together and we go to dinner at Threadgills, which is like, as I said last week, it's right up that way and turn left, and it's right around there. It's on North Lamar. It's the original. It's where doesn't matter.
Okay.
Pearl. Somebody will get that later. I don't even know what the hell I'm doing now.
That's okay.
But I wanted to get back before we take a couple calls to finish this out.
Especially the one proving God.
Yeah, especially as an atheist. So, yeah.
Okay.
Fascinating.
To removing the fig leaf.
Which we appreciate.
And, as a professional host of a TV show who doesn't give a rat's ass what the chat room has to say, I thought I would actually engage my hosts on the topic that they're here to talk about, rather than fine-tuning, because I'm pretty sure Neil was in agreement with the chat room.
About what?
About how much time we wasted on the last call.
Well, probably, yeah. I'm also wondering if there's any chance we could get the feedback on that. Should we let them know about that?
Oh, yeah, they know it freezes up on occasion.
Okay.
That's all right. I still see you. You look just as pretty in the freeze shot as you do in person.
That's
I
all
love
that
it when they
matters.
flirt.
So, what are the plans moving forward with removing the fig leaf?
Well, at this point, it starts with just hearing everybody's stories. We have a queue of probably a dozen writers at any given moment who are putting posts in, and we're going through and editing them, and every one of them's awesome. I mean, it's one of the best jobs ever to sit down and read what everybody's talking about, because everybody's coming from a different situation. Like, we had a writer a couple of weeks ago that wrote about what it's like being bisexual and on the autism spectrum. And we have transgender writers, we have folks who are bisexual, folks who would identify as pansexual. There's a lot of directions to go with this.
Asexual?
And asexual as well. But we're pretty much getting the whole gamut represented, and I only expect that to extend as time goes on. But anyway, I just...
You mean there's not just one way to do sex?
That's exactly what we're saying. And, one of the things we're going to be doing is exploring...
We're going to have to talk later, Matt.
How many right ways
Sorry,
are there
honey.
to be sexual? Even the folks that would rather be polyamorous, for example, and rather have open relationships, there's a tendency sometimes for people in those relationships to assume that their way is the way everyone should be. That if I am polyamorous or open, that is the ideal that everyone should pursue, and anyone who is monogamous is doing it wrong.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I had a friend who I still love, good friend, and we talked about this. But we had a conversation at one point. He said, if you're not polyamorous, you're an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I've heard that tone quite a bit.
maybe. You could be, you're right. It's not necessarily impossible that polyamory might be the best thing for everybody if we get rid of everybody's baggage. But that's not necessarily true, even if we did get rid of everybody's baggage.
I think some people are just wired the way they're wired.
Yeah.
And part of what we're trying to do is say, provided we're under that banner of safe, sane, and consensual, you find what works for you and explore all the possibilities. But once you settle down to, this is what works for me and this is what I enjoy, then embrace that and enjoy that, and that's fine. And that's not going to necessarily look like what it looks like for everyone else. And that's completely okay.
And we already know that it's wrong because there are people who are asexual.
Right.
And so by telling them, you better be polyamorous or there's something, well, of course, maybe they are polyamorous, they just don't want to have sex.
Right.
Because that exists.
That exists as well, absolutely. But there does seem to be, I know people who are really excited about, owning their, polyamorous tendencies or whatever. And I see it where, they tend to push that sometimes and say, this is the way it should be, this is the way, everybody should be this way. Well, it works for them, and that's awesome. And then there's other people, we know people, we have a private chat room, or a private support group for people who are affected by some of this with removing the fig leaf. And we've had conversations in there where we have some people saying, polyamory has saved my marriage and it's been wonderful and I'm a better person because of it. And we have other people who say, that will never work for our relationship. Not because it's bad. Like, they will say, good for you. I'm glad that works for you. But for their particular dynamic, it's not something that either one of them are comfortable with. And so what we're just trying to say is, find what works for you and then, go from there, basically.
And shockingly, there's not just one way to poly either.
There's really not one way to do anything.
So here we are. If you went back about a century, let's go back to the early 20th century, where pretty much you knew about straight people, and you knew about cisgendered people, even though that wasn't necessarily the label, and you knew about gay people, but you didn't really talk about it much.
Right.
And nobody really probably thought too much about bisexual. They're straight and in a weird situation, or they're gay and hiding, whatever. And so we move forward a little bit and we get gay, straight, bi. And then we get to the idea that, hey, maybe there's a spectrum of way down here you're straight and way up here you're gay, and you can be anywhere in between. And then we get to the point where we figure out you might be here on Thursday and here on Tuesday.
Humans are complicated.
Yeah, really.
What on earth does this tell us about this idea? I mean, is everybody just sinful and possessed and evil? Or could it be that Bronze Age people just didn't understand sex very well?
Right.
Yeah, and someone was controlling the narrative very, very tightly. Yeah, no, the more freedom you have from whatever that control is, in our case it was a religious background, the more you explore and find out that there are a lot of ways to be sexual, and they can be very fulfilling and very enjoyable. And the narratives that you were told about things like you'll feel empty, you'll be giving up pieces of yourself, I mean, there's all these like horror stories that you're told, and then when you get out there and experience it for yourself, you realize they were making that up. That was just horror stories they were telling to keep you under control.
So, at least, I was trying to think of what might be the worst of the bunch, because I absolutely despise purity culture. I mean, when I see some of the things that goes on, it just seems gross. Where you've got some dad symbolically getting married to his tiny little daughter and putting a ring on her finger and telling her to. I mean, I just want to puke.
Yeah.
Now, am I wrong to do that? Because isn't that in the category of, well, maybe that's right for them? Or have we crossed over into uninformed consent and fetishizing our child brides?
That's a loaded question at 10 minutes.
Well, it seems like certainly you're speaking about something or someone in ways that aren't age appropriate. You're speaking about marriage and defining this person's existence before they've even grown to become a consenting adult themselves. That's what's creepy about it. There's no agency on the part of the child at that point. It's just the father saying what that child is.
And you're tying in the idea that someone else owns this person's sexuality.
Yes.
That's, to me, like you were talking about, what's the most damaging part of it? And I think it's this complete loss of personal autonomy. That as human individuals, we have this inherent right to discover ourselves and what we're attracted to, not attracted to, all of those things, in terms of relationships that are, platonic, sexual, whatever, and we have that right to figure that out for ourselves as we grow into adulthood. And I think as parents, we have that responsibility to teach our children how to do those things. But this idea that, someone else controls your sexuality, someone else owns your sexuality, and then on top of it, you should be ashamed and feel bad about, breaking the rules and going outside of that construct. to me, that's where, you know, the inherent shame and awfulness comes in. That's the worst.
I think one of the things that amuses me, you know, and I've watched my own views on a number of things change over the years.
Same here.
You know, hey, I used to be a fundamentalist and blah, 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 blah. I remember this idea of the father giving the bride away at a wedding. And the thinking on this just used to be kind of the default.
Right.
And now, you know, if I ever had a daughter, you know, well, the only way I'd do anything close to giving her away is if that's what she asked me, you know, would you walk me down or whatever. But I was at a ceremony, a wedding, a Christian wedding recently, and you know, the preacher would ask, you know, who gives this woman? And what I noticed is that the response was, her mother and I do.
Right.
They think this is progressive.
Right.
They
That's a
think that
huge
we've
step.
moved away
Yes.
from daddy's giving you away to her mother and I. I've included my wife as the property owner of, you know, that we're relinquishing this property. It is, I'm applauding them in the sense that it's
Baby steps.
kind of a step,
Yep, it is.
but
It is.
kids aren't property.
Right.
Exactly. Where would they get that idea from?
I don't know.
Gosh, if it's almost like there was a book that maybe
Must be
prescribed
reinforcing
this
this.
idea that.
Maybe we should ask Ken Ham. He's got a
That's-
book.
I heard.
Let's go to Mike in New York City. Thanks for waiting.
Hello.
Hey, Mike, you said you can prove or disprove God.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying I can, but I have an experiment which I think is, you know, pretty good chance that we could, you know, put this debate to rest.
Do you want me to
We'll
shoot
take
it
this over a
full?
lifetime, though.
Mike, do you want me to shoot it full? Do you want me to shoot this method full of holes or just go with it?
Absolutely. I know you're good at that, Matt. So,
Okay.
by the way, Sarah, Neil, how are you?
Great.
We're good,
Thanks.
Okay. This is how it goes, Matt.
very
This
polite.
will take a lifetime. You take parents, they volunteer with their kids. You have them isolated without being influenced by any religions or anything whatsoever. They raise their kids totally isolated, no internet, no radio, no religion, nothing. And I would like to see, after they grow up without being exposed to anything whatsoever, which religion would emerge, or if a religion would emerge at all.
Yeah, so if in fact you had kids that were completely isolated from everything in this experiment, and they came out with a handwritten Bible that matched the current Bible or a handwritten Quran,
Absolutely.
I think that would be really strong evidence for it, provided we were able to account for everything. We'd have really strong evidence that there was something going on that we couldn't explain. And then we'd have to ask, why the hell don't you just talk to us? You clearly talk to them.
Right, that's what we would have
Exactly.
evidence of, that
That's
there's something we
exactly
can't
what I'm saying.
explain.
But-
I still don't know that we would make the leap to God, but go ahead.
Yeah, but the problem here is that let's say those kids grow up and they don't have any religious view at all. Have you disproved God in any way?
Well, the idea is that if they somehow, if God wants to communicate with them, He would communicate with them.
See, that's
Right.
the fatal assumption, that you're assuming that if a God exists, it wants to communicate. And I think that we already have pretty good reason to think that that's not the case. So your method wouldn't actually ever disprove a God. It wouldn't even disprove a God that wants to communicate, because he may have some other way of communicating, or he might want to wait until they get back into reintroduced back to society and then communicate with them then. So it can't do the disprove.
But that kid's just not one of the
Yeah.
elect.
True.
No. They'll live their entire lives, all the way to death, from birth to death.
Okay.
The reason why I'm bringing this forward is because there is a tribe in, I think
Piraha.
it's the Amazon.
Yeah, the Piraha.
The Piraha, they know no religion.
Yes.
So they've lived their lives, you know, generation after generation, and they have no religion.
Yep.
So I believe, honestly, that in itself, in the natural state, is a proof of the non-existence of God.
I don't think it's a proof, but I think it's a good argument against the claims, which is why I used it against Psy. And Sai's just coming up all the time
I
today.
know, right? Like, you shouldn't say his name this many times.
Right.
You know,
He'll show
If you
up.
say him 3 times, he
Sai 10 Burger Cake. Sai 10
don't do
mouthful.
this. Do you realize what my email's going to look like?
Another problem is that the fact that you find one tribe that's that way, that's non-theistic by default, isn't that somehow negated by the fact that you can then point to 20 others that have some form of superstitious beliefs, maybe even their own form of tribal religions that were not affected by other tribes? I mean, wouldn't that actually counter your argument?
Right, but that's just it, is that you will see religions emerge, but it would only prove that that's just man-made. And we see it worldwide, where you have Hinduism, you have Buddhism, you have all these different religions all over the entire world, and they all are different because of the region where it developed.
Sure, I think it's one of those things where, like, we all agree with you, but if I put my former fundamentalist hat back on, it's very easy for me to then say, well, that's explainable because, one, Satan influences people all over the world, and two, if they weren't necessarily chosen by God or they're not destined for heaven or whatever version of Christianity you believe in that gets people to heaven, they're just not a part of that group, so therefore why would God necessarily waste his time infusing religion or wrong religion or whatever into them? They're just not going to heaven in the first place.
And there's a couple other problems as well.
I mean, there's
Basically,
plenty, but yeah, that's...
those individuals' lives who live their whole life separate from this, their lives, apart from the time span, are fundamentally identical to a child that dies after 2 days. Neither of them are exposed to any religion, so you can't reach any conclusion from it. And even if they emerged off of this isolated island with a handwritten copy of a Quran that exactly matched, some of the Quran, you still don't know how that was accomplished. You can't. You have to, in order to be able to say that this is confirmation that a God exists, you have to have a method to examine and investigate the supernatural and confirm that it exists and that can interact. Because otherwise, you're looking at a magic trick. And as somebody who's preparing a big show for September at ApostaCon, I am going to be doing things that are similar, seem to be similarly impossible to what you're describing. So it's almost impossible to constantly check for all potential forms of trickery or flawed thinking. There's a reason why, when the James Randi Educational Foundation was testing for the $1 million prize for this, they would come up with a test protocol where both parties would agree to what a success or a failure would be. And even if they got to the point where somebody passed the test protocol, which never happened, by the way, if somebody passed it, you still haven't confirmed that they have a supernatural ability. All you've been able to do is confirm that on this day, they were able to do what they said they could do, and we don't know why. The only way to confirm that, I'm not even sure, and this is, there are people who are going to get really pissed when I say this. I'm not even sure that there is a way that a God could demonstrate that he actually exists. Because we get back to Arthur C. Clarke, and any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So if I'm here as a limited being, and I don't have an understanding of the full universe, and some being shows up right here in the middle of the show, materializes right here, the cameras zoom out, everybody can see him, and he starts talking, he starts telling us, or her, come on, starts telling us all the things that we don't know, and then claims, I am the one and only God. Do you think that that's, do we have good reason to say that's true? How could that possibly be proved?
We have to investigate further.
All I know is some immensely powerful and smart being has shown up, and if he wants me to worship him, he can kiss my ass. I'll fully respect him if he's a humanist.
I agree with you 100% because
then you're right.
We should return to the 14th century. They'll probably think we're God.
Yeah.
Multiple tribes in the Amazon right now.
Or you could go to the UK and evidently, as long as you're a parent, you qualify. Thanks for the call, Mike. I appreciate it. We've got like less than 5 minutes left on here, and I have one theist, and this is going to be so disappointing because this could be Larry. You there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm kind of nervous talking to you, man.
You don't have to be nervous because we only got like 2-3 minutes left, so I want to just get to what you had to say.
Yeah, no, you guys were talking about the multi-universe or something like that about 2 callers ago, something like that. And it was a question that, it's been on my mind a while about, because you used to be a theist. Somewhere in the book of Peter, 2 Peter, the 2nd chapter, it says about the heavens and the earth being on fire, and that's going to be destroyed. And I'm just curious, do you think that refers to the universe, or just the earth and the heavens where God dwell? I don't know if you follow my question, thoroughly.
Well, I'm not sure that it's in 2 Peter, but I'm also not exactly sure what verse you're referring to. But if you're asking us what we think these verses refer to, Sarah, what do you think that those verses about destroying the heaven and the earth refer to?
I think they refer to verses in the Bible that I don't necessarily have any opinion about, quite frankly, because I don't think they're true.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, because I'm sorry. I'm just thinking that that when it says the universe, I mean the heavens and the earth, I'm thinking that refers to the entire universe and all the other galaxies and so forth. And I'm just thinking that since the earth is the only one that was screwed up, why will the other galaxies be destroyed?
Yeah, so there's a number of possibilities here. The author may have intended that verse to apply to a multiverse if a multiverse existed. And the author may have applied... Sorry?
And they were aware of it in the Bronze Age?
Yeah, well, they wouldn't even... If it was inspired by God, they wouldn't have to be aware.
Sorry. My bad.
They might have meant it only to refer to the heaven and the earth, but I don't care. Because the first question is, whatever this book says, why should I believe it? I mean, you could have a letter from your Uncle Joe saying that the United States is going to be completely wiped off the map next Friday.
Okay.
Why do I care what your Uncle Joe says? And I view the Bible the same way. Until somebody demonstrates a good reason to consider it an authority, and that somebody should pay attention to it. And by the way, none of those predictions in the Bible are specific enough to actually care about. I mean, I've seen vague predictions all the time.
Right.
So my issue is not what does this mean, because I think if you spend a good deal of time trying to figure out what this means before you have good reason to consider whether or not you should care what it means, then you're spending your time unwisely, I would say.
Oh well, I just wanted to know your take on that. I really appreciate that you answered my call.
Sure. Thanks, Larry.
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it.
Have a nice day.
Not sure we could bring the multiverse into that verse, but And incidentally, I came from a theological background where they had reinterpreted a lot of the apocalyptic language of the New Testament to refer to things that happened in the first century anyway.
Yeah.
They were just metaphors for things that refer to the destruction of Jerusalem or the ending of the Old Covenant or whatever. And there's 1,000 ways you could take that don't have to do with looking at the news every day wondering, is today the day the Antichrist is going to come?
Yeah. Meanwhile, we've been living in the last days now ever since they were first announced.
Yeah, for at least a couple thousand years.
And every time somebody says the world's going to end, so far they've been wrong, and which I find really strange, since the Bible says nobody's going to know the date and time, and yet people like Harold Camping tried to announce the date and time.
It's a major industry.
And then there are people who say, so and so is the Antichrist. I think Obama was probably the latest one. He better get busy because he doesn't have a lot of time left.
He's going to take over the United Nations next.
Are you?
That's how he can do it.
Yeah.
Like Damien.
He's not done yet.
Ooh.
New World Order.
Yep.
Sorry.
Sorry, I have to say this. I did a podcast with a Christian who's a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and you could almost see his brain explode. And when I told him that I wasn't at all concerned about the possibility of a one world government and might be in favor of it, and he was like, it was pretty bad.
He was looking for the chip on your hand or your forehead.
Yeah, because he had bought in. So one of the things about arguing is that if you buy into a flawed or incomplete premise. We've seen this several times today. Oh, well, if there was a God, he would do this. Ooh, not necessarily.
Right.
Right. I didn't know that.
Maybe there's some other God. Maybe he doesn't want to communicate. Maybe he didn't want to build anything. Well, if you isolated people off and this happened, ooh, hang on a minute. You have to think detailed. And if, in this conversation about a one-world government, if your beginning assumption is a one-world government would be evil and too much power in one location, you have to extend that to every form of government. It's all too much power in one location. Wait, why can't we have checks and balances? Why can't we apply the same checks and balances that we do at the county, or the city, county, state, federal level to a worldwide government? Why do you have to automatically assume that it would be a bad thing?
It's that, the conclusion jumping. If this, then I'm automatically going to presume this.
Or worse, conclusion leading. They're convinced that this is going to be the case, and so they are only worried about arguments that lead to that conclusion rather than finding truth. I want to take a moment here to thank everybody out on the other side of the fish tank glass out there for coming down to the studio today, and to Neil and Sarah for coming down. Neil also does a blog, Godless in Dixie, and Sarah does everything, seemingly, and so we'll probably see a lot more of both of them, but be sure and check out Removing the Fig Leaf. And
on Patheos.
On Patheos, and we'll get links up or something along with this one. That's it for our show. We'll see you all again next week. Bye-bye.
Hi, this is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. You know, The Atheist Experience is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of viewers like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values that you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.